Thank you for those kind words. Thank you also for inviting me. I'm actually really excited to be here and excited about this opportunity to talk a little bit about one of the places in this world that I got to love a lot. So I'm originally actually from Belgium, Europe, and I moved to Honduras in 2014 after a backpacking trip through Central America. And I was in Honduras birding and guiding and living for the last 8 years until I moved out again in January 2021, because I now have a job, as Colin said, at the American Birding Association, which I'm also super excited about. But so yeah, I was asked to give you a presentation about Honduras, about birding in Honduras, about traveling there, a little bit about the culture. So I'll try my best to cover most of that. I'm not a scientist. I am a birder who just learned by interest and by being out there and just exploring either on my own or with friends or other guides or eBird reviewers and all sorts of experts. And then I've learned a lot over the past so many years. But yeah, if you have any questions whatsoever throughout the presentation, just drop them in the chat or interrupt me. I'm actually entirely fine with that. So if something pops up in your head, just go ahead and ask away. Someone will keep an eye on the chat, I'm sure, and just let me know, because I can't look at 3 things at the same time. I'm not that good at multitasking. So, okay, let me find how to share the screen here. Okay, I think we're good, right? Okay, cool. So as I said, I'll focus on Honduras because that is the country that I have spent most of my birding years in, and that's where I have lived most recently. And I think it's an incredibly interesting country that's still very much off the beaten track, that does not get as much attention or positive attention as it deserves, in my opinion. I think it's beautiful. I loved living there. I always felt safe. I made a lot of friends. I traveled around the country on my own and with clients and with friends all the time. And I just got to love it. So I sort of assume that people in Canada do know more or less where Honduras is. So it's this country smack in the middle of the isthmus between North and South America. So that has a number of consequences that are generally really good for birding, because that means that all the flyways basically pass through that bottleneck that is Central America and that Honduras is a part of. Oops. So I've configured this presentation sort of as a virtual tour throughout the country, trying to highlight some of the areas that I really like, that are very good for bird watching, that are very biodiverse, and that also just have beautiful landscapes and cultures. So these are some of our best birding destinations in the country here on the map. As you can tell, most of them are located in the westernmost 2/3 of the country. That's because the far east of Honduras, which we call La Mosquitia, as you can see on the map, is a huge, really remote natural area, national park actually, or there's 2 to be precise, but it's so remote that there are no roads in there. If you want to go to the Mosquitia, it's absolutely stunning. It's all lowland rainforest, and then there's a few slightly higher points where you get out of these massive trees that you can see in the back over there in Harvey's picture, out of those massive trees and get into really interesting elfin forest. So that's all in the far east, and then all the way towards the Nicaraguan border, you all of a sudden get out of the lowland rainforest and into the pine savanna. So it's a really interesting area, but it's an area that very few people are lucky enough to explore because of its remoteness. If you want to see more about that, there has been a very interesting National Geographic documentary about it, because rather recently they discovered a pre-Columbian, or they discovered remnants of a pre-Columbian civilization in the Mosquitia jungle, and there has been a documentary filmed by National Geographic about that. So that's all really exciting, because obviously like people thought that was just so remote that it must have been empty all this time, which is apparently not the case. But so generally on a trip to Honduras, this is sort of like a little bit off limits, because it takes like horse riding and hiking and rafting and dugout canoes to actually make it in here. But if you get a chance, just go for it, because it's wonderful. It's a once in a lifetime trip. So most of the more accessible areas, as said, are in the sort of westernmost 2/3 of the country. And what we were talking about earlier is that Honduras is actually a super mountainous country. Most of the country is actually mountain. We have a small, like a very narrow coastal plain in the Caribbean. So that's the northern part of the country. That's our Caribbean coast with the Bay Islands and Cayos Cochinos. And then we have a plain around San Pedro Sula, which is what you see here on the left-hand side in red. And then all the way in the south, where you see those two green and red dots, Choluteca, that's the Gulf of Fonseca. That is the Gulf that we share on the Pacific coast with both Nicaragua and El Salvador. So that's also lowland country, very, very dry lowland country. But other than that, Honduras is just pretty much all mountains. So I started my virtual tour through Honduras in Gracias, in the western department of Lempira. So we are fairly close to both El Salvador and Guatemala, so western part of the country, right? In that part of the country, there's a lot of pine forest. That's also something that people don't always realize, that even though we're sort of in the tropics, we're in the neotropics, we do actually still have lots of pine forest, too, pine and pine oak forest. So where I used to live, this is basically the picture on the left-hand side. That used to be my backyard. That's the view that we would have from the road in front of the house. So this is Selaque National Park. It's the highest elevation park in the country. It goes up to 2,800 and a little bit meters. And at lower elevations, as you can see, it's sort of like a pine and a pine oak forest. And then if you get higher up, it becomes cloud forest, like everything above 1,600, 1,800 meters will be cloud forest. And you'll see like a little bit what the landscape looks like on that right bottom picture. So this area has quite a few of the Mesoamerican endemics that are relatively easy to see over here compared to other regions. One of the species that every single visitor that we've had asks us for is the one on the top left. That's Oscillated Quail. It's a very sought after bird. It's also really hard to get because, as you can already tell from this picture, it's super camouflaged except for that black and white face pattern on the males. And on top of that, they'll just like other quails, like they'll just sit really, really still and not move and just disappear in the environment. And you can stand basically right over it and not see it. It's really, really hard to get. But so that's one of the birds that we find in that pine forest. It's not a really dense pine forest. It's also not exactly pine savanna yet, but it sort of has spread out pine trees with grasses underneath. And these birds, these ocellated quails, the way we find them usually is because there's a specific type of vegetation, a type of, it's not really a grass, but it's like a low vegetation. They feed on the roots of that, and so they scratch in the ground. So if we see all these scratch marks on the ground, we know that there's probably ocellated quail close, or at least they have been close in the morning, or they might be close again in the afternoon. So that's sort of what we try to look for when we try to locate ocellated quail in the pine forests there. Another of the Mesoamerican endemics is bushy crested jay. Those luckily are not as hard to find. They're pretty raucous. They make tons of noise, and they'll make sure you've seen them. So, so that one. And then on the top left picture is a sparkling-tailed woodstar. That's also a species that somehow is only found in really small areas. And we were very lucky that the type of vegetation where we were, the type of forest, the combination of like, there was a stream down below with some dry shrub, and then we had the pine forest and the pine oak. And we were really lucky to have this bird in our garden, and we planted a lot of flowers to attract hummingbirds and did a lot of hummingbird photography. So sparkling-tailed woodstar was always a stunner for visitors when they came to the area around Gracias Lempira. And then our top bird over there, and one of the main reasons why tourists started to actually go to Gracias, to that part of the country, is the one on the top, on the bottom right. That's Honduran Emerald, and that's Honduras' one endemic bird species. So if you want to see this bird, you have to go to Honduras. And that was found first in a valley, a very arid valley in the northeastern part of the country. There's actually a reserve there to protect this species because it's so limited in range that they were really worried that if it's only in this valley, then if we don't protect it here, we're never ever going to get it back, right? We're never going to see it. So luckily though, so there is a reserve specifically for that in the Valley of Lloro. But over the past few years, and it's really just a few years, maybe 10 or so, additional populations of Honduran Emerald have been found in completely different areas of the country. So now we have a population near Lake Yohoa. There's a population in Gracias, which is actually pretty easy to see. There's a population in Olancho. So luckily, obviously also because more and more people in Honduras have actually picked up birding and more eyes are watching, we've discovered more populations of this species, which is still endemic to Honduras. So we're very, very proud about that and very excited that there's more individuals than we originally thought. So that's actually good news. Then Gracias is also a place that where indigenous culture and Spanish culture converge. So they are very proud of their indigenous heritage. There is also in Honduras, every month of July is National Heritage Month. And so these pictures were taken during some of the parades that they organized, where they remember their national hero specifically, who is called Cacique Lempira. Cacique just means chief. Lempira was his name. And he is known to stand against the Spanish colonization. So they're pretty proud of that, and they really celebrate that not only in July, but specifically then, but actually also throughout the year. But then you also see the combination with the Spanish architecture, like you see on the bottom right. So Gracias really has like a nice mix of excellent birding, but also culturally very interesting elements. So yeah, that it's also just the most beautiful small Spanish colonial town. So it's very picturesque and just a very nice place to be. I always love living close to Gracias. So yeah, so that's why I wanted to start with this destination, I guess. And then we move on to the interior highlands. These views are from a region called Marcala in the department of La Paz, which is, as I said, the interior highlands. You can tell from these pictures that it really is a mountainous country, right? And it has all these mountain ranges and valleys just crisscrossing the country, making it very interesting. Giving like an interesting altitudinal variation, but also because they sort of crisscross, it makes for interesting patterns of rain shadow valleys and very rainy areas, very dry areas, very arid areas. So it's got a very interesting mosaic of different habitat types and different vegetation types on top of just the altitudinal variation. So as I said, these are the interior highlands, and I picked some of the top species that we try to see over there. These are both cloud forest species. The one on the left you might mistake for a barred owl, but it's not. This is a fulvous owl. And the one on the right is blue-throated motmot, one of the few motmot species that does not have the rackets on the tail. So as you can see, this one just has like a squared off tail. It's found like only in these specific like cloud forest interior highland areas. Honduras actually has 7 different type of motmot species, which is more than any other country in the world. So yeah, this is just 1 out of 7, but it's the most range restricted one in the country. All the other ones are slightly easier to see. And another thing that this area is very well known for is the coffee production. And whether that's good or bad, you can discuss. It's Honduras' #1 export product. This is really important for our economy. As you can tell, it's also really important for local people. Almost every family in Honduras will be involved in picking coffee when it's coffee season. The entire society is basically organized around that. Holidays for the kids, vacation for the kids from school is organized around the coffee picking season. And even though it's not so much the case anymore, or it's at least not as widespread anymore, that kids have to go with their parents to go pick coffee in the season, it's still a big deal. So most people that live in the countryside make a living picking coffee or producing coffee in one way or another. So the tourism industry obviously has picked up on that too, and there's all sorts of fincas popping up now that organize coffee tours that will explain you everything from the tree over the berries to the roasting and the cupping, and you can try the cupping yourself. It's a good experience. It's good to understand how important this product is, and also see how you can combine it with bird watching, because the coffee plantations in Honduras, they're all shade grown. There's almost no sun-grown coffee in Honduras. So there are good combinations of tree cover and the coffee underneath. So they're actually generally good places for birding. Maybe not for the rarest of rare species, but in general, they attract quite a lot of birds. So that's good. As I said, if I go too fast or if anyone has any questions, please do just let me know. If not, we'll continue towards the capital. The capital of Honduras is called Tegucigalpa. Most people will just say Tegus for short. It's easier also for us in Honduras. And Tegucigalpa is an interesting city. It's pretty big. It's entirely built on hills, a little bit like Rome maybe. And very close to the capital is Honduras' oldest national park called La Tigra. Again, it's mostly cloud forest. So one thing you need to know about how the national parks in Honduras are configured is that basically everything about 1,800 meters in altitude is automatically considered protected. So that means that that's really good in a way, right? Because that means like you'll protect quite a significant portion of your territory. On the other hand, that also means that you're protecting generally the same type of habitat. So you'll have parts of pine and pine oak forest, and then you'll have the cloud forest. So generally, the cloud forests in Honduras are in fairly good shape because they're high up and they're automatically protected because they're high up. So some of the species found in that cloud forest in La Tigra National Park close to the capital, and I said it's literally 30 or 40 minutes from the airport. This is really close for people to visit, either when you fly in from somewhere else, fly into the capital, or even for people that live in the capital themselves, right? This is like a popular place for people to go hiking or just spend the day out in the forest. So we go there to see species like wine-throated hummingbird. That's probably one of the toppers to see over there. Resplendent quetzal, of course. If you go to Central America, I think you have to go and see a resplendent quetzal at some point. And then singing quail is another bird that many people try to see when they visit the La Tigra National Park close to Tegucigalpa. And some shots just to show you what the city looks like. This is the picture with the Christ statue. Is actually taken from the road that leads up to that national park. So this is the view, like looking back down towards the capital, and you see how it's surrounded by mountains, or built on mountains actually. And then so we're now sort of in the like slightly towards the eastern part of the country, not entirely yet, but anyhow, we're going like farther north and farther east now. This is the area that I talked to you about at first. This is the Mosquitia. So as you can see in that picture at the bottom, it's just this vast expanse of forest with no roads or anything. Like it's got the streams in it. It's got the most amazing combination of trees and plants and undergrowth and all of that, but so yeah, so no roads in there. There are some trails, obviously, because despite what people might think, there are actually people living here. There are some indigenous groups that are tied to these lands, primarily the Mosquito. That's the biggest indigenous group in this area, and then there's Pesh and Tawaka. Those groups are still somewhat respecting their traditions. They're still living out in this land. However, as in many other countries, indigenous populations are under a lot of pressure, have been for way too long, for like centuries by now. So most people have lost their language. There are still some native speakers of Pesh and Mosquito and Tawaka, but it's definitely declining. Although over the last 5-6 years or so, there has been a little bit more interest in reviving the traditional cultures and the indigenous languages. So there are a few schools, for example, that will offer at least part of the classes in the original language, but it's, as I said, it's unfortunately very, very limited still. But there's hope for the future that they will not let these languages and these cultures just disappear. So hopefully they'll be in time to do that. But then back to the birds. So this is, for Honduras, probably the best region to see antbirds. Also on the Caribbean coast, like the lowland rainforest on the Caribbean coast is fine too. But primarily here in the Far East, in the rainforest of the Mosquitia, long-tailed tyrants, yellow-throated toucans, white-faced nunbirds. Those are all species that we can see over there. As said, like it's mostly expedition material, But if you ever get a chance, that's some of the species that we can see over there. As I said, still some more traditional or some indigenous culture here with traditional transportation in pipantes is what we call them, dugout canoes. And just to give you an idea of what the communities in the jungle over there look like. So just the wooden huts with the thatched roofs, that's what everything looks like over there. And then we do trips through the Mosquitia, basically going all the way to the southernmost part of that jungle reserve and then rafting all the way down towards the Caribbean coast until you reach sort of more tranquil waters, and then we change and we continue the last stretch in one of those dugout canoes, except they're a little bit bigger because we're not used to being in such small boats and we'd probably just fall straight out. But so yeah, it's an interesting area to explore. And we expect that there are still lots of bird species there that have not even been recorded for the country. Bird species, plant species, everything, insects, definitely. So one of my dreams is to traverse the Mosquitia from east to west, because that has not been done before. And even if it's just because of that, that makes it something I would want to do. But also because I just think there must be a lot of animals there and plants there that we just don't know about yet. Maybe not new to science, but at least new to the country. So that's one of the projects that I still somehow have on my wish list. And then the Caribbean coast, as I said, it has the rainforest, but it also has some very interesting mangroves. So again, a different habitat type. And that's one of the interesting things about Honduras. I think we were talking about that earlier, that Honduras is actually pretty small and you have all these different types of habitats in such a small country. Like you drive for an hour and you'll see an entirely different landscape, see an entirely different type of vegetation, type of habitat, and an entirely different set of species. So I think for me as a birder, that makes it really interesting and worthwhile visiting. So we get agami heron, we get chicanas. American pygmy kingfisher is usually one of the popular species to see in this area. Mangrove cuckoo. And again, here we're in a different region also culturally. The North Coast has a lot of Garifuna people. So those are the descendants from the slaves who landed on the Caribbean islands and on the Caribbean coast of Central America. So they brought their own music and their own food, their own culture entirely. And they look different. They're a Black people, whereas most other Hondurans farther towards the interior of the country are Native Indian, right? So an entirely different culture altogether too on the North Coast. And then very briefly, we do have like those beautiful dream islands in the Caribbean Sea, the Bay Islands and Cayos Cochinos. They're obviously great for relaxation to start with, just with all the turquoise sea and white beaches. It's just stunning. But also they have some bird species that we do not generally get on the Honduran mainland. For example, white-crowned pigeon, although that has been found recently also on the Honduran mainland, but for example, also yellow-naped parrot, or there are breeding colonies of least terns out on the islands. Oh, and I don't know why I don't have a picture of that, but there's also Caribbean dove out on the islands that we never get on the mainland. So it's worth taking like an extension or so of a day or 2, 3 out to the islands just to see that. It's also an amazing destination for scuba diving because it sits on that Mesoamerican barrier reef, which at this point is probably the healthiest, biggest reef in the world, because the Great Barrier Reef around Australia, unfortunately, is not in like excellent shape. So luckily, the Mesoamerican reef really is still in fairly good shape, and the people on the islands are making a very active, admirable effort to keep it that way. So there are very clear restrictions on what you can and cannot do, the equipment you can use. So the diving schools out on the islands are really responsible and are making a very positive effort to protect that reef. And then this is, as said, like coming back slightly inwards from that lowland rainforest on the Caribbean coast. These are the mountains of Picobonito and Nombre de Dios. It's a mountain range that sort of follows the Caribbean coast. It's not as high as the pictures or the areas that I showed you before, but it's still significant. This is the third highest range in the country, and that starts just a few kilometers off the coast. So it goes up pretty steep all of a sudden. Again, with its own set of species, like blue-throated golden-tail, there's rufous-tailed jacamars there. This is an excellent spot to see keel-billed toucans. They'll be everywhere there. Red-capped manakins and white-colored manakins. So those are some typical species for that area. It's also one of our more touristic places. As I said, Honduras is still very much off the beaten track, but of all the places in Honduras, the North Coast has gotten a lot of attention for example, more adventure travel, like the rafting you see on the right. It has all these beautiful waterfalls. It has some really good and pretty luxurious rainforest lodges. So that Caribbean coast, the Picobonito Mountains especially, have developed really nicely as ecotourism destinations. And then this is that valley that I talked to you about very briefly, like in the beginning of the presentation, when I mentioned that Honduran Emerald was only found in the Yoro Valley. This is the Yoro Valley. From the nearby lodge nearby is basically, you have to leave really early in the morning, like 2 or 3 in the morning, to get there very, very early, because it gets so hot there that after 9 o'clock, you basically do not want to be out in the sun anymore. But so this was the first location where they found Honduran Emerald, and this is the Honduran Emerald Reserve in the Yoro Valley. Other than Honduran Emerald, pictured again here at the bottom right, this is also the place to see roadrunners. It's also a place to see crane hawk or white-bellied wren. All of these species can be found in that area, and you just have to make sure that you arrive really, really early. And then another one of my favorites, and a place that I lived at for a few years. This is basically pretty much also our backyard. So I had like the highest mountain in the country for my backyard for a while, and then I had this lake for my backyard for another while. So it's a pretty amazing place to live. So this is Lake Hawa. It's sort of in the center west of the country. It's the only natural freshwater lake in the country. So it's really important. It's recognized as a Ramsar site, so of international importance, because of the bird life, but also because there's endemic salamanders and other animals that are found in those wetlands around the lake. So again, a very biodiverse area because of those wetlands, but also because it is surrounded on both the western and the eastern side by 2 other mountain ranges. On the western side is the Santa Barbara Mountains, and on the east we have the mountains of Cerro Azul Meambar. So that makes for a really interesting like altitudinal gradient, and just so many different habitat types that are connected around this one spot in the country, just this one lake. So probably my all-time favorite place to be. I said, you'll just get, you can drive from, you can take a boat ride out on the lake in the morning and go and see bare-throated tiger herons, and then you can get in a car and drive for maybe an hour or so and basically be in the cloud forest and see blue-crowned pleurophonias or kill-billed moths just like that in no time. So it's just the proximity of everything around the lake is really stunning. So it has the wetlands and it has the cloud forest. It has pine forest around it too. It has dry scrub, dry thorn forest, all of that within like about an hour and a half drive each. So yeah, this is probably the most biodiverse area that we have in the entire country. If you ever had only 1 week to go to Honduras, you go to Lake Hawa and you will not be bored for 1 minute. You will see something new all the time, every day. Oh, and also it has really good food because it has this fried whole fish that's the specialty around the lake. So if you go there, that's one of the things you definitely have to try. It also became a very popular destination for kayaking. So when I moved to Honduras, there were maybe 20 kayaks around or something. And by now they have 250 or so. So in the last 7 years, they just developed that kayaking business and it took off like nothing. It's extremely popular with Honduras themselves. So this has become like a vacation destination for Honduran people. So that's nice. And it's good because there's not a lot of motorized vehicles on the lake. Most of it is just rowboats and kayaks, and there are some motorboats, but it's really not that much. So it's still pretty nice and peaceful and great for birding because things don't get scared all the time. You can just take a rowing boat out or a kayak out and explore the wetlands. And that's actually what we usually do. In the picture, there's a motorboat just because we had some more people back then. But generally, we try to work with a local fisherman and we pay them to take us out in their traditional rowboats in the morning. So they make a little bit of income doing something different than just fishing. And we get to get really close to the birds because we're really quiet and just not using any engine-powered vehicles. So that's really nice. It's a nice cooperation between the local community and the birders and the guides. And then I said Honduras. So this is only like our native species, right? The species that are always there. And then on top of all of that, we are this big migration bottleneck, and we are an important wintering ground for some of the species that will come from the north or from the south, because you have like reverse migration too. But it's a really important bottleneck for all the migratory species moving back and forth between North and South America. Like all the flyways basically pass through Central America and thus through Honduras. So we get thousands and thousands and thousands of pelicans. We get your plovers that you are used to much more than we are, and sandpipers and all those shorebirds that you actually get to see sometimes in breeding plumage. So unfortunately, the one disadvantage of this is that we generally get to see them not in breeding plumage, and they all look pretty much the same. But it's interesting, and obviously it's really important. And that also makes it clear how important it is that habitats get protected, not only where you are, but also where we are, because if there is no way for them to survive on their way south or just during winter, then they're not going to come back and you're not going to be able to enjoy them either. So I think this whole traveling and birding makes that very clear, that everything is so interconnected, and if we want to make a significant difference, then we also have to make sure that we're interconnected and that we work together on all of that. So yeah, just very briefly, lots of birds in Honduras. There's almost 800 species in Honduras. Not quite, but almost. And there are more records still found, as I said, because more and more people are actually starting to bird, but it's also a culturally interesting country. It has some of it's the southernmost tip of the Maya Empire. Culturally. So there is an important Maya archaeological site in Copan, which is close to the Guatemalan border. It's not a huge site. It does not have like the giant pyramids like Tikal or some of the places further up north have, but it was a culturally very interesting one because of how advanced the sculpture is and because they have this big hieroglyphic staircase that basically explained the entire history of Copan in writing, just right there. They just had to read it, basically. The other thing that makes Copan interesting is that there's a big archaeological cut. So I don't know if you know this, but the Mayans used to build in layers. So when a new dynasty started, they basically covered up the previous pyramid and then they built another one on top of it. And so that's, if you can make a cut through all of that, you'll just get an idea of all those different generations of architecture and culture and sculpture and art. So that's what they did in Copan. They made a cut through some of these pyramids and you can actually go underground and see the previous layers with all the colors still on it, because we think it all looks like rock like that, but it didn't. It was all paved and painted white and red and green and yellow and all these amazing colors. So it's a very interesting site to visit because of that cultural interest, that cultural advanced element. So then again, more of the Spanish colonial influence. You'll see it's a very religious country. And then some of the traditional arts and crafts. Here are some more pictures from the site in Copan. It's also a really good place to see Scarlet Macaw because there has actually been a reproduction and what you call that, like release program in Copan that has been highly successful over the years. So they're they're doing really well, and they're actually looking for new places or more places now to continue their release program. So it's been really good, and they've been doing a really good job at working with the local communities and informing them of the importance of this species. This is a national bird of Honduras, by the way. And it's, I mean, it wants your attention, right? I mean, it's this bright red, yellow, and blue bird, so it sort of works to use as for raising awareness about ecology and birds and habitat protection and all of that. So they've been doing a really, really good job, and they work with the local schools and all of that. So that's been very nice. And then other than that, as said, Honduras is just a great country for everything that's sort of outdoorsy. Birding, obviously, but also everything else you could possibly think of: whitewater rafting or ziplining or scuba diving or snorkeling or hiking, like literally anything you name it, it's amazing, and it has some good food. So traditionally, obviously, we have like we eat a lot of tortillas. They call themselves los hijos del maíz, the children of corn, because corn is so important in Honduran culture, especially in the western part of the country. So yeah, los hijos del maíz. It's a basic staple. Like you can't go to Honduras and not have corn tortillas or baleadas, but those are flour tortillas. Anyhow, if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to take them. I'll also let you know that I have to make a little bit of promotion, right? That we are actually running a tour to Honduras that I'll be guiding along with some other guides, local guides, in February, March of 2023. So if anyone is interested in joining us, that'd be super cool. And you can just follow us on our website at aba.org or drop me an email and I'll be happy to give you any information you need. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Katinka. That was really a fascinating presentation. I'm sorry I wasn't a birder when I was in the northern part of the country there in the 90s, because it looks like I missed some really amazing things.
Yeah, it's really, really, really good for birding. It's sort of unspoiled. So that also makes it interesting, right? As it is off the beaten track, but it's also just, there's these vast expanses of natural areas, and you can walk for a day and not see another living soul other than obviously all the birds and other creatures, but not another human. So yeah, that's interesting. I like that about it.
So if anybody does have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them, or you can type something in the chat. I'm watching there. I'm not seeing any questions yet, but you can type something in there, and I'll relay it to Katinka.
Wow, thank you, Katinka. That was very fascinating. You covered all other things that I was certainly interested in, because not just the birds, but some of the wildlife and the culture, because obviously you're not going to have birds every hour of the day, so you need something else to do. And so it makes it very intriguing that, yeah, especially people are going to be interested in the food, of course, between the birds you have to eat. And you had some very appetizing pictures of the food there.
Yeah, it's interesting also, just because it is so diverse. Even the food is diverse. Obviously on the Caribbean coast, you have these delicious seafood and coconut soups. They're just the best. And then you get into the country, and then at the lake, I said, you have this fried fish, which is really important. And then other than that, sort of the most basic food you can get in Honduras are baleadas. They're flour tortillas with mashed beans and whatever you want to add, eggs or avocado or cheese or whatnot. That's sort of like the most basic breakfast food you can get. And then you get farther towards the west, you start getting things like pupusas, like they have in El Salvador, which are these filled filled corn tortillas, but they're like stuffed.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's good food.
So we can have a birding fooding trip.
Oh yeah, we totally could. Birding, food, coffee. Do not forget the coffee; it's delicious. And culture, yeah. I said it's still got some interesting indigenous culture. So the Lenca, for example, there are also still descendants of the Mayas, Incopan, the Maya Chorti, the Tawaka, the Pej, the Miskito, and then the Garifunas on the coast. So yeah, it is a culturally interesting experience too.
Well, yeah, to have those two cultures, like prominent cultures, like the African culture on the East Coast, and then native culture, I guess you say, on the Highlands and on the West side. So that would make it interesting too. Just spend
exactly
several days in each side. One of the things I was wondering, Katinka, is we're starting to promote bird-friendly coffee here, and I'm wanting to know. You said that most of them are shade grown. Are they actually the Smithsonian certified bird-friendly coffee farms? Have they gotten that far yet, or just make sure that they just try to have as much shade grown as possible?
Shade grown is just the traditional way that coffee is grown in Honduras. So that's one thing. There is at least one Smithsonian bird-friendly recognized finca in Honduras that I know of. There are some other shade-grown and organic fincas in the country. Not all of them are organic. So you have sort of like different stages, right? You just have the shade-grown, and you have shade-grown and organic, and then you have the shade-grown and organic and bird-friendly and the Smithsonian label. So I know of at least one in the country, but I couldn't really tell you if there are many more than that.
And the other important thing too is coffee with the fair trade certification, and making sure the farmers that what's looking after the best interests of the farmer's income. We want to look after the best interests of the birds with the bird-friendly coffee, but also important is having the fair trade certification to make the farmers get a fair wage for their work. So do they have fair trade certification farms as well? Or?
It exists, yeah. There are some farms that have the certification from Oxfam. That's just the one I know because it's in Europe. And then I know that there are some more local programs for fair trade, even though they may not have that actual label. There is not a big move yet towards those labels, and it's hard to get certified, right? So I think we'll start seeing more formally recognized labels in the future. But at this point, I only know of a few, and they'll obviously promote that to market their coffee, right? But it's not generalized yet.
But from your point of view, what you've seen there, Katinka, is there like the equivalent of fair trade?
I think it exists. So one of the thinkers that we used to work with and that we would do coffee tours with, they created sort of their own system to make sure that people get paid decent money for their work and they got benefits and all of that. So I guess you could consider that fair. They don't have a label though.
Yeah.
Then as said, there are some that are labeled fair trade by Oxfam, or I forget what the other name for it is. There's the Rainforest Alliance that that gives out labels. So there's a few of those in Honduras. And other than that, it's just a mishmash of everything.
Yeah.
I do think there is still a lot of work to be done to make coffee fair trade in Honduras, because coffee pickers are generally paid very little money. So yeah, so the lowest, like the base of the pyramid, like these lots and lots and lots of people who do a lot of really hard work, because picking coffee is hard work and you have to be very precise, because you can only pick the berry, you cannot touch the stem at all, because then next year there will not be a berry there. So you have to be super precise about that. And so they do a lot of work and they get paid very, very little money. So yeah, there is still a lot of work to do to make sure that fair trade becomes a general thing throughout the country.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the coffee was such a huge part of their not just their culture, but their income throughout the country. Yeah. So fair trade would make a huge difference if it
would.
Well, I don't know what the downside would be to the fair trade certification from the farmer point of view, but is there a downside?
In itself, there is not really a downside, except that the processes are cumbersome, lengthy, and expensive.
Oh.
Most finca owners will just probably not either have the means or the willingness or even the awareness to want to invest in a certification, because that's the other thing. Honduras is poor, but also all the information that's available to you in the United States or in Canada or to us in Europe is not necessarily available to people in Honduras. Very likely, they're not even aware of the fact that they could have a label. I mean, they will, if they're like big finca owners, then obviously they will, because they will be exporting their coffee. But all the like local producers, they'll not invest in that either, because they don't have the means to do it, or they don't have the information, or it's just such a cumbersome process. And it's really hard to get the right information and just figure out exactly what you have to do.
Yeah.
So we do have some questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Should we come to some of those?
Yeah.
So Carolyn asks, what other types of animals are there? And then there's a follow-on from Sherry asking, are there any snakes or other predators to watch out for? And Joan is asking, are harpy eagles found in Honduras? Or what about potus? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Potus, yes. There are definitely potus in Honduras. There's common potu and there's great potu. So both of those can be seen in various places in the country. There are harpy eagles in Honduras, in the Mosquitia. They're hard to get to, but they're there. They have been recorded. There is evidence of them. So yes, they're definitely there. Then I already forgot what else. Wait, I'm trying to look at
What
this.
other types of animals are there? And are there any snakes or other predators to watch out for?
There are definitely snakes. I have not actually seen all that many snakes, and that may be surprising because I really know they're there and people are generally scared that they'll see a snake. However, in my experience, it's actually really hard to find one, especially when you're birding because you're looking in a different direction. But sometimes we do see them along the side of the trail or something like that. There are venomous snakes. So there are dangerous snakes in Honduras. There are coral snakes. There are, what you call them? Fertilans, I think is the English name. So yes, they're definitely there. There's also a whole bunch of rather harmless snakes like boas, and there's a pink boa out on the Cayos Cochinos in the Caribbean Sea that's endemic to that island.
Huh.
Beautiful. So pink boa. So we definitely have some snakes, got tiger rat snakes and all of that. So yeah, fine snakes. And then other predators, there are ocelot and there are jaguarundi and there are margay and there are jaguars. So those can all be found in Honduras. They are all very, very hard to see. You might see a margay or a jaguarundi or an ocelot at some point. Jaguars, I think I know like literally 2 people who have seen them in Honduras so far. So they're really hard to see, but we know they're there because there are camera traps and they do get caught on the camera traps regularly. So we know they're there. Let's see, other than that.
Are they still at Salake? I know when we were there, that was one of the things.
Jaguars?
About, yes.
So some of the local people will say they see them, and I mean it's very well possible. If they're there, they must be really far up in the mountains. I haven't heard of any recent evidence that there are jaguars in Selake. All the sightings that I know of are from either the Mosquitia or the Caribbean plain, like the lowland rainforest in the Caribbean, or the Picobonito and Nombre de Dios mountains.
So, and then we had another one asking whether, saying that someone, Shirley was saying she'd spent 2 weeks there 20 years ago. There's a lot of poverty and malnourished children in the nearby hills near Copan. She's wondering if that's still the situation and whether drug trafficking, the narco traffic is an issue in the country.
Honduras still is a very poor country. We still have over 60% of the population living in poverty. So it may have gotten slightly better, but it's still definitely not great. So yes, there are still a lot of really poor people, especially in the rural communities. The area around Copan is still a very poor area. That actually goes for the entire western part of the country. So yes, unfortunately, we're still sort of the red lantern, I'm afraid, in Central America and actually much of Latin America. So yeah, it's really hard to find a sustainable way out of there too, because of problems with corruption, for one. That's sort of kept the country in the state that it is currently in. Even if foreign aid comes in, it'll not necessarily reach the right people. and government spending, a lot just disappears in some rich ministers' pockets. And that is unfortunately the day-to-day reality still in the country. Let's see how this changes, because there just have been elections in Honduras. There is a new president. There's, for the first time, a female president. She's made some interesting promises to work to eradicate poverty, to work for women's rights, all of that. She's only been there for 4 months though, so we still have to wait and see whether these are just empty words or whether she'll actually act upon them and make change. I really desperately hope that she will. I hope that she can manage to fight corruption, because I really think that that is the main obstacle for Honduras to develop, to create a functional economy and to lift people out of poverty. And I do hope that they can do it in a sustainable way. And that's one of the reasons that I really wanted to try and be involved in ecotourism in this country, because it has so many natural assets. It should be relatively easy to use those in a way that benefit the local people and help generate income in a more sustainable way than palm oil and banana plantations. So I'm still hopeful. It's hard and it's slow, and corruption is definitely not helping. So if there was one thing I would wish they could solve over the next 4 years, then it would be that they would really just clean up that mess and make sure that all the projects that do get started actually finish, and that whatever investments are made actually benefit the right people. And so that's my biggest hope for this country, because it has so many assets. There's no reason why Honduras should not be the next Costa Rica. There's no reason why, other than mismanagement. So yeah, unfortunately, yeah, that is still the case.
Good. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Does anyone else have a question? As I said, you can unmute yourself and try asking.
Well, it's getting to be 11 o'clock in Texas now, so we should probably let you get some sleep tonight, Katinka. But
yeah, so I can go birding tomorrow morning.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. So yeah, I think we better let you get to bed, and I really appreciate you allowing for that 2-hour time difference, because we're not quite ready for bed here, but we know you will be. So thank you very much, and appreciate you doing it on fairly short notice. And I really enjoyed it. I've always been interested in geography and culture. So thank you very much, Katinka.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me here. I had fun.